I'm going to teach you how to take care of ball pythons using PetSmart products. Now, the absolute minimum sized enclosure that you can get away with a ball python is the length of the snake. These snakes like to stretch out and stretch up that spine, so it needs to be the length of them so they can do that. My ball python stretches out all the time. Adult males will average out around 3 foot, females will average out around 4 foot. Of course, these are averages and exceptions to averages do occur. My adult female is 5.5 feet and she's in this 7-foot tank right behind me. I know what you must be thinking, how big is too big for a ball python? Well, my local zoo keeps and breeds ball pythons in a 23-foot long tank that's over 2,000 gallons. And these snakes are decades old. So the truthful answer is there is no maximum size. The only maximum size there is when you lose control of temperatures and humidity and you can't control it because it is that big. I have graphed out the monthly wild temperatures from decades of data. Here is an average year. That dip there, that's the wet season. West Africa is very close to the equator, which is why the temperatures are so consistent. Based on this data, I'd recommend an average air temperature of 73 to 80.6 Fahrenheit. And if your air temperature fluctuates between those, absolutely fine. What you'll see is ball pythons will either bask more or less depending on how warm the air temperatures were that day or even the night before. Ball pythons can actually go up to a warm object and use that to warm up, or they can go sit in the sun. So at a really basic level, you can give them that under tank heater, use that for belly heat and set that around 88 Fahrenheit and you'll be golden. But, and a big but, it's so much better to give them that overhead heating as if it's the sun. Not only is using a heat lamp from above more natural, but it's a type of infrared that the sun gives off, so it's really good for their health overall. This type of infrared helps with healing of the skin, and it helps with the immune system and many other health benefits. When researchers surveyed hunters out in Africa and how they actually found ball pythons, one of the main ways they actually find them in the wild is actually looking for them basking in the sun at the mouth of their burrows. So basking is inherently important to the species as a natural behaviour. So a cleverly placed hide can actually allow that to happen in our tanks. If you have your hide just before the basking spot starts, they can sit in that hide near it, and in the morning they can come out and sit in their basking spot and think they're at the mouth of their burrow. You want the surface temperature of this basking spot to be anywhere from sort of like 86 to 95. The true answer is you're just going to allow that ball python to sit there and absorb it onto its back and warm up as much as it wants. Just make sure that from that 86 to 95, it's just a safe bounds that you're not going to get belly burns or anything like that. There was a study that looked at ball pythons and what they actually did when they put them in vivariums. Most of the ball python's activity between all 35 animals happened between the hours of 4 p.m. to 11 p.m, with a lot of them using basking to warm up as part of their day. So we know it's really important to them, so let's go and provide it. Now, ball pythons can survive without UVB, but it's so much better to give it to them. It greatly helps with the ball python's health. In fact, the oldest ball pythons I've ever heard of all had UVB. In that same vivarium study, they showed that ball pythons basked significantly less when UVB was not there, and basked more when UVB was present. So we know these animals truly value UVB based upon that. My personal rule is all snakes should have UV. That's my baseline, and I won't give them any less unless it's temporary and I have to. I'd provide a low-level UVB bar, just 1/3 to half the enclosure towards the heat, so you have your little patch of sunshine and then your shaded end, so that ball python can go sit in the sun or go cool down in the shade, just like nature. It's all very natural. Okay, well, how long should we leave these lamps on for? Well, lucky for you, I've also mapped out the wild day lengths in Western Africa as well. You can set your lights on for 12 hours on, 12 hours off. If you live somewhere truly cold, then what I would do is recommend like an additional ceramic heat emitter or radiant panel, or the heat mat on a thermostat set to the low 70s, so that will stay at that temperature if the night does get below that. Where ball pythons come from, it's very, very humid. In fact, if you look at this chart, it never really drops below 50%. So to maintain this, I actually recommend spraying the enclosure in the soil. What that does is it adds water to the soil, and then when it's heated during the day, it gives off that humidity in terms of water evaporating and adds to the ambient humidity in that enclosure. What I would do is just aim to keep humidity above 60% in that enclosure all the time. A large water bowl big enough for your snake to actually soak in is essential. What that does is allows them to soak if they want and drink from, of course, but also that big surface area of a wide water bowl allows it to evaporate quite readily, and that also helps with bumping up that relative humidity in your enclosure as well. The biggest tip that I can give you is change that water daily. My ball python, what I've seen, and the ones I worked with in shops as well, you would change the water, and if you left it a week, if you came back and changed the water again, they would then be there instantly guzzling water. And I generally think they hold off because they want fresh water, and they hold off. And what you can do is actually dehydrate an animal because they're holding off. But if you change their water daily, they always have as much opportunity as possible to hydrate as much as possible. It's really, really essential. None of this waters once a week rack nonsense that you see ball python people spout online. Just change their water daily. It's a basic given, right? You would do it for your dog, so do it for your snake. As I've hinted at earlier with the spraying, you want a substrate that can actually absorb water without going moldy. Now, the aspen beddings, they will go moldy, so you want a nice water absorbent substrate that's not going to mold, so that when it does get heated, it's going to give off that humidity for you. The deeper your substrate goes, the more humidity it can retain. What you'll find is if you give it a deep substrate and then you water that substrate, it will lock in a humid microclimate at the bottom of your substrate, even if the substrate surface level dries off. I would definitely recommend giving your ball python a lot of hiding opportunities. If you can, one big piece of cork or decorations along the back wall so that your ball python can go across the entire thermal gradient without being seen. That just adds that extra level of like security, and it means that they don't have to choose between feelings of security and then wanting to thermoregulate. I like to use log piles, the things that can get in, behind, on, underneath. It's just really important that there's really cluttered mess. Ball pythons are really keen on thigmotaxis, and what thigmotaxis means is they like the feeling of security, of like a tight space. So for us, it would be like weighted blankets. That weighted blanket makes people feel secure. That's how a ball python feels when they want to be in a hide. Now, ball pythons actually do climb trees in the wild, and they love to climb. They can get better at it. If you had one that came from a rack and then you give it climbing, it's going to be pretty poor at it at the start. But if you just give it that time, it will learn how to climb, and its muscle tone will improve, and it'll start stripping away that fat on the body condition as well, and it'll get better and better at it. Next, let's talk about feeding your ball python. Now, I feed my ball python a nice varied diet. I find that is incredibly important, and I try to swap between different prey items each feed as best as I can. Generally, overall consensus that you should feed a ball python the size of prey that's like the widest part of their body. Generally sort of like 10% to 15% of your ball python's total body weight should be the weight of the prey item that you feed it. Now, that is a good rule of thumb to go by as a general means, but there was no real scientific reason as to why that was made up. It's just things that people have stumbled onto that have become like absolute rules in the hobby, and it doesn't need to be that way. Let's say you had a 100-gram meal that you're going to feed to a ball python, right? Well, you could actually feed that ball python 2 50-gram meals, and it'll be absolutely fine because the same amount of food has gone into them. It's still the same 100 grams. If it's a juvenile ball python at less than 200 grams, then I would feed it sort of like every 5 to 7 days. From that stage to sub-adulthood, I would actually feed every 2 to 3 weeks. And you would move it to the 3-week mark progressively with size. And then with adults, I actually recommend a fully grown adult should eat once a month. They don't need to eat that much. Once a month is absolutely appropriate. Now, you can feed more at certain times of the month. Let's say that your ball pythons come into like the end of spring, summertime, and that female was like really, really hungry, then let's say you could feed her 2 meals a month during that period, and then you come back down to a month again as well. You might find that your ball python doesn't eat during the winter months. Mine isn't eating right now, and it hasn't during the winter since sort of November. That's absolutely normal. So you might actually find that you average out around sort of like 6 to 12 meals the entire year. If you're new to ball pythons, this might actually sound like you're starving the animal, but trust me, these guys are built to last. They have incredibly slow metabolisms, and they want to eat infrequently, not every 5 days. It's not a dog or a cat. It's absolutely fine that they eat once a month as a big adult. For an adult ball python, their body goes through a massive physiological change when they're digesting a meal, to the point where like the kidney enlarges by 2 times, the heart enlarges, all the blood flow goes to the stomach, and it's this week-long process that changes the very like organ size of different organs in a ball python's body. So if it takes them a week to digest, and they're in this sort of like changed physiological state where they just lie there and just have to digest, and then you're feeding them immediately once a week, they're never getting out of this stage of like having their heart enlarged or their liver or kidney enlarged, and it's this weird state of just power feeding and letting a ball python never be a ball python. And then what you get is the old boys, the old heads of the hobby saying, hey, ball pythons don't move, but actually if I fed you Christmas dinner 4 hours after you had Christmas dinner, you would be sat there like, oh, before, and that's kind of what it's like for the ball python. They need that rest period, they need that state outside of digestion for the heart to go back to normal size, for the kidney or liver to go back to normal size, and for the blood to like not be as thick and move away from digestion, and that be back to the normal state of a ball python. They need that break. I cannot stress that enough. Now, ball pythons have a reputation for like not eating for long periods of time, and they'll go on a fast. If your ball python doesn't lose weight during that time and it's not losing more than 10 to 15% of its body weight quickly, I wouldn't really worry. There are many reasons why a ball python might go off food. They might be sensing that it's winter outside and the climate and the weather of your location is throwing them off and making them feel that they need to fast. You might have a dog running past that's stressing them. There are many different reasons, but if you like fine tune to figure out what those reasons are and you eliminate variables like a dog scaring them or overhandling, and you're seeing them just go through a normal time of year thing, absolutely fine. Now that you have a good idea of ball python care, let's go into the PetSmart products, what to choose, and then how to use them. If you want to start with the starter kit so that it's smaller for a baby ball python, then the Zoomed Reptile Habitat Snake Kit is a good start. The tank measures 30 by 12 by 12 inches. At the time of recording, this is $109, but it does need some modifications to make it really work for a ball python. There is no UVB in this kit, and that is a big problem for me. So what I would do is buy the Zoomed Reptisun 10.0 UVB for $28.99. That's the 15 watt one. Then what I would do is put it in the Reptisun fixture for basically $50. Now the old T8, the thicker tubes, they would degrade in like 6 months, so you need to replace that. Or if you can find it, the Arcadia Shade Dweller kit, that's the bulb and fixture all in one for $40. Now these are the T5s, the thinner new advanced technology, the new tubes. They will actually last an entire year. So not only is that better, but it's cheaper. Now they sell out a lot in PetSmart because of that. So if you can find it, grab that. Then like I said before, I would place that off to the heat side so you have your little patch of sunshine and your shaded end. Now the heat bulb is actually okay, those fixtures are fine. The blue colour is a little bit weird and 100 watts seems very intense. But saying that, as long as temperatures are within bounds, then what I would do is actually use that until it blows, especially if you're on a budget. And when it does blow, I would go and replace that with either the Zoomed Basking Spot or the Exoterra Intense Basking Spot. Both of those have a much better spread out from the bulb of the infrared. Much better. However, if you find that it's too hot immediately, then go get one of the better bulbs anyway and take it down to like a 75 watt bulb or even a 50 watt bulb. Those bulbs are like $10. Now you can use that heat mat, you just need to make sure that you're not overheating that tank. Anytime you're using a heat mat, I would recommend that it's thermostatically controlled. You can buy the Zoomed ReptiTemp thermostat for $35, and then you can place that probe so it's reading the surface that it's getting to, where the ball python would sit on the inside of the glass where that heat mat is, and as long as it's within safe bounds, that's fine. You can even set that thermostat somewhere in the low 70s, so it's just there as a supplemental nighttime heat if you want. It's there during the day, it probably won't come on because it's probably going to get hotter than that, but once everything else turns off and your heat lamps and your light turns off, that heat mat might just sit there and be a nice little warmer spot for the ball python. So if your air temperatures do get cooler at the night when you have a window open or something, there's that spot that stays in the low 70s for your ball python. You also need to be able to actually read these surface temperatures, so what I would go out and buy is the Zoomed infrared digital thermometer. Now that's basically a temperature gun. You point and shoot and it tells you the infrared emission or the surface temperature of the object or the ground that you're pointing at. That right there is $40, but once you bought that, you can use that for any tank in the future, any other animal, and they last a really long time. I'd put the stick-on thermometer on the cool end or the shaded end on the glass so that lights aren't on it, so that it's not raising it above the actual air temperature and giving you an elevated false reading just because the lights are on it. I actually did an experiment where I put a thermometer in a light box with really like cheap Amazon LEDs, and those LEDs actually raised that thermometer significantly higher than the actual air temperature of that room. All I did was actually show that you're just reading how much you can just heat a thermometer just from photons and radiation from light being upon it. Next, I'd actually buy a different substrate. Something like the Zoomed ReptiSoil or ReptiBark, or a mixture of both. I've actually got the Zoomed ReptiBark and ReptiSoil in my ball python's tank. Those bags are like, what, $10? They're really good at holding humidity. And these substrates won't mold when they get wet, like those aspen shavings will. The decor that comes in this kit is fine, you just need a lot more of it. You can buy one of those hides with the entrance hole so you can stuff it full of moist moss and make that humid burrow for a baby. Or you could buy woods and logs and to fill that space. The decoration is your choice, just make it cluttered and give them that opportunity of security along the entire thermal gradient. In total, that's coming to around $240, not including how hardcore you want to go and what decorations you want to choose and how expensive or cheap those are. So $240 to get started is pretty good. So you can use this setup until your ball python exceeds the length of that tank. Once you get to that point, you need to upgrade. Now at PetSmart, the Thrive EcoFlex terrarium is 46 inches by 18 by 18. That'll allow that ball python to stretch out just that little bit more, and it's only around $250. The good thing is you can just transfer your heating and lighting over across to that terrarium. The heat mat, less so, but by that point though, your ball python would have outgrown that heat mat because it's quite a small one, so your ball python will be significantly bigger than that, so you don't need that anyway. Or as an alternative, you can get the Zilla Quick Build terrarium, and that is a true 48 inches, a 4 foot by 18 by 18, and it's glass. So if you really want to, you could buy a new much bigger heat pad and put that on the bottom of that tank. The same applies, you can transfer all that heating and lighting on top straight over. Now this is more expensive, it's $399, but what I will say is it has much better mesh than the Thrive mesh. The Thrive mesh, I don't know why they've done it, but it's so thick that it blocks out like 60 to 65% of light and heat going through it. So you're going to get much more UV and much more heat penetrating through in the Zilla mesh because that's much wider and blocks much less. Again, I guess you kind of get what you pay for here. In time, if your ball python grows beyond 4 foot, or you just want to give your ball python more space, because 18 inches by 18 inches isn't really that big when a ball python loves to climb. If you just want to give them more space, then you're going to have to buy things outside of PetSmart at that point. These amazing PVC tanks behind me are 7 foot for my ball python. They came from Custom Reptile Habitats. Custom Reptile Habitats are the best enclosures I've ever used. So if you want to check them out, link in description. Subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video.